The following programme contains strong language and language that some listeners may find offensive. It's the 19th of September. At White Hart Lane in North London, Tottenham Hotspur are about to kick off their opening Europa League group match against Norwegian side Tromsø. The week before this game, the Football Association warned all supporters, including Tottenham's, that use of the word yid at a football match may result in prosecution. Given that Tottenham fans have chanted this word as a show of support for their club for more than 30 years, why now has the FA taken this stance? Tottenham's identity as a Jewish club dates back almost 100 years. Despite the fact there was actually a larger Jewish population in the East End of London in the early part of the 20th century, much closer geographically to West Ham United, it was Tottenham that won the support of the Jewish football fans. This was partly due to the ease with which they could travel to White Hart Lane. Using cars or buses on the Sabbath, when almost all football matches took place, was strictly forbidden. But the tram and train links between the East End and Tottenham, use of which were permitted, made getting to White Hart Lane relatively simple. Anthony Clevane, journalist and author of Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here? A History of Jews in Football, says that wasn't the only reason.
Were glamorous. They won the FA Cup, and West Ham weren't glamorous. And I think that there was a sense that they weren't welcome at West Ham. So the Jewish connection with Spurs goes back to the 1920s. A few Jewish players started to play for Spurs, and then the second generation, third generation moved out of the East End into the north of London. And that's when Spurs, I would say in the 1930s, became the Jewish club.
It wasn't for almost another 50 years that the word Yid would be chanted by Tottenham fans on the terraces of White Hart Lane. The word itself actually means Jew in Yiddish.
Amongst the Jewish community itself,
explains Jewish Tottenham supporter Ivan Cohen,
if you go back to the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe, they would call each other Yid if they didn't know each other's name, or it would be a term to recognise that you're talking to a fellow Jew. It means Jew.
But in between the two wars, it took on a new meaning. I asked Anthony Clevane, who is himself Jewish, how the word is received now within the Jewish community.
To a Jewish person, it means the same as it would be if you use the word nigger to a black person, or Paki to a Pakistani or of Asian origin. It's a racist word. It was used by Oswald Mosley and the Nazi black shirts in the 1930s when he was marching in the East End of London, saying the Yids, we've got to get rid of the Yids. And it then became a derogatory term, a term of abuse, and it became a race hate word.
By the mid-1960s, Tottenham's identity as the Jewish club was well and truly ingrained. The club had a large Jewish following and was located in close proximity to the large Orthodox Jewish community of Stamford Hill. With the events of Nazi Germany just 2 decades old, where 6 million Jews were rounded up and murdered, Tottenham supporters were easy targets of anti-Semitic abuse by rival fans. This music was the theme tune for the 1960s sitcom Till Death Us Do Part. The main character, Alf Garnett, who was a bigoted, racist and anti-Semitic West Ham fan, helped popularise the term Yid as an insult by routinely referring to those Spurs Yids. Incidentally, Warren Mitchell, the actor who played Alf, was a Jewish Tottenham supporter. Football grounds in the 70s were fairly vitriolic places by all accounts. Columnist and author John Crace, who is a long-time season ticket holder at White Hart Lane, remembers the abuse aimed at Tottenham.
I don't think anybody really thought about it specifically as there was a widespread anti-Semitism, but it was almost kind of part of the culture of football. And I can remember going to games in the 70s, and Spurs fans were regularly just called Yids as a form of abuse. by opposing fans, primarily, other London clubs, Chelsea, West Ham and Arsenal.
According to Ivan Cohen, chants of Yid wasn't the only form of anti-Semitic abuse Tottenham supporters were subjected to, and he says what started off as sporadic abuse from a hardcore minority soon became more prevalent.
I really didn't notice any overt anti-Semitism until probably about 77, when you started to hear gas chamber noises. It was made quite clearly, and you would get the odd thing outside the ground, fuck off Yids and stuff like that. But again, that always tended to be a minority rather than a mass movement. By the 70s, that started to change. It had become cult, and it was beginning to become more mainstream from opposition supporters.
So towards the end of the 1970s, Tottenham supporters routinely found themselves on the receiving end of anti-Semitic abuse from rival fans. And what happened next was quite extraordinary. Tottenham supporters began to refer to themselves as Yids and started to chant the racist term in a positive way as a show of support. John Crace saw this as a celebration of the club's Jewish identity.
I think it happened in the late 70s. I couldn't be 100% sure about it. It's something that evolved, but it was also something that I became aware of as a kind of reclamation of the word, as a sense of pride in the club's Jewish heritage, and that we started sort of chanting, Yid, Yid, Yids, and there was something very powerful about it. And I used to go to games with some Jewish friends, and he loved it. He really, I was sort of slightly uncomfortable about it, but he was, this is fantastic to hear kind of Yid being used in such a kind of positive, declamatory way, and as a form of identity.
As John Crace said there, the precise time and origin remains contested, but Ivan Cohen remembers quite vividly the first time he heard Tottenham fans using the word Yid.
I think it was 78, up at Old Trafford. It was wintry. I can recall, people would breathe and you'd see the wisps of air coming out their mouth. And I remember seeing a group of Spurs fans coming in their donkey jackets, which were very fashionable for football supporters. And a whole bunch of them came in, and they had these nose and mouth masks that you wear if you're doing drilling or other DIY tasks, and they turned them round onto the back of their heads as if they were a skull cap. It took me a bit unawares, but they started chanting Yids. It was a small group of hardcore Spurs fans. For me, it stayed as a cult thing amongst that kind of a group, probably until the late 80s, early 90s, and when it started to become more manifest.
For more than 3 decades, Tottenham supporters chanted the word Yid completely unopposed. The use of such a derogatory term had barely been questioned nor challenged by anyone until 2 years ago. In 2011, Jewish comedian David Baddiel and his brother Ivor, who is a writer, both of whom are Chelsea fans, teamed up with football inclusion campaign Kick It Out and produced a short video to encourage football supporters, both of Tottenham and other clubs, to think about the use of the word Yid. This video and the debate it created eventually led to September's statement from the FA encouraging all supporters not to use the word at football matches. I wanted to go to White Hart Lane to find out if the FA's intervention would have any effect.
The next station is Seven Sisters. Change for National Rail Services.
So I've just gotten off the underground at Seven Sisters Station. White Hart Lane is about a mile down the Tottenham High Road, and it's just over an hour until Tottenham kick off their Europa League match against Tromsø. As you know, it's the week after the FA statement. It'll be really interesting to see if the crowd take any notice of that statement. As someone who visits White Hart Lane on a fairly regular basis, I'm expecting nothing less than to hear the usual chants tonight. The streets are already lined with Tottenham supporters making their way to the ground. There's a buoyant atmosphere in the air, as there tends to be for the evening European matches. So let's get down there. Anti-Semitism in football is an issue that hasn't ever gone away. We're certainly a far cry from the bad old days of the 70s and 80s, but there has been and still is an underlying problem in the game. The word yid is still commonly used as a form of abuse by rival supporters, particularly of London clubs such as Chelsea and West Ham, and far worse anti-Semitic insults are still aimed at Tottenham supporters. Journalist Jacob Steinberg, who is a Jewish West Ham fan, describes an incident he was involved in a few years ago at Upton Park.
Out of nowhere, suddenly someone who's maybe standing in the row behind us shouted out Hitler was a Cockney. The implication being that Spurs fans are Jews and West Ham fans hate Spurs, therefore Hitler was a Cockney. My friend turned around and told him to F off basically, and it all turned a bit nasty from there. At that point it was not a particularly nice place to be in that specific moment.
Ivor Badil experienced something similar at Stamford Bridge while watching Chelsea.
Someone behind me stood up and just at the top of his voice went, fuck the Yids, like this. And nobody's saying anything, nobody's stopping him, and he carried on. And we're season ticket holders, so we know people, most people around us, and we've been in the same seats for years. So this was very unusual. And then he carried on for a little bit, and then I think somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said, actually, there's quite a few Jewish people sitting around here. And he, in a moment, in a heartbeat, as it were, he just kind of went, yeah, well, fuck the Jews, like this. That was the point. I mean, I'm not hard in any way, but I just cracked, turned round, and there was a bit of a horrible confrontation. It was thankfully all verbal, but I told him to shut up and sit down. He told me to fuck off. I told him to fuck off. Incredibly, he did sit down and stop shouting, but I hated it. I sat there. For a moment, I was expecting him to attack me, to a knife in my back, and my brother and other people were saying, "Well done, you did the right thing." But I just felt I was really upset and pissed off and annoyed.
It was this incident that served as the catalyst for the Badil brothers to produce the short documentary entitled "The Y Word."
For some reason, a lot of fans still shout this word, and it begins with Y.
What they're chanting is a racist word for Jews, the Y word.
The Y word is just as bad and just as offensive as the N word and the P word.
The purpose of this film was to raise awareness about the word Yid and to ultimately spark a debate about whether it's acceptable for Tottenham supporters to continue to chant a word that is, to some people, unquestionably offensive. Tottenham supporters argue that they use the word in a positive way, with absolutely no intent to cause any offence. Jewish Tottenham fan Ivan Cohen believes that supporters have reclaimed the term of abuse as a way of deflecting anti-Semitic chants from other clubs.
When language is used against people offensively, they do reclaim derogatory terms as a badge of honour. In many ways it becomes disarming. Because Spurs were known as a Jewish team, and because some opposition supporters recognised that and started referring to us as Yids, when you turn it round and becomes a badge of honour, it diffuses a lot of that.
But Ivor Badil says that hasn't happened.
If you're trying to deflect an insult by taking it and claiming it as your own, then really the aim is to deflect it and stop other people doing it. But that hasn't worked. What's happened with Tottenham is it doesn't make other supporters stop saying it. It makes other supporters chant it at them even more and chant far, far worse things.
So I'm just moments from the ground now. The pavements and the roads are packed full of Tottenham supporters. We're about 10 minutes away from kick-off. Even outside the ground, I've already heard cries of Yid Army from groups of supporters. And just as I make my way towards the South Stand entrance, there is a guy up ahead who's wearing a replica shirt with Yid for Life on the back. I should also point out at this stage that the official club shop don't actually sell any merchandise with the word Yid on it, nor do they print it on the back of any shirt sold in the shop. Right, I'm going to make my way into the stadium now, and let's see if fans heed the warning of the FA. It's hard to argue Ivor Badil's point that Tottenham supporters' use of the word in a positive way has failed to deflect anti-Semitic abuse from rival fans. In November last year, Tottenham travelled to Rome to face Lazio in the Europa League. One supporter ended up in hospital after being stabbed in the head and the leg following attack from a group of supposed neo-Nazis prior to the game. During the match itself, Lazio supporters chanted "Juden Tottenham" to the section of Spurs fans that had travelled to the Italian capital. Just days later, West Ham United visited White Hart Lane for a Premier League match, where a large proportion of the visiting West Ham fans clearly engaged in anti-Semitic chants like "He's coming for you, he's coming for you, Adolf Hitler, he's coming for you," and hissing noises to imitate sounds of gas chambers were also clearly heard. Jacob Steinberg says he's embarrassed to hear such chants coming from fellow supporters.
Before the game, it was already a sort of poisonous atmosphere because there was a lot of chants about the attack on the Spurs fans in Rome. And if you were, sane, you are embarrassed to hear your own fans chanting that. There is a lot. Football fans do like to, they do go for the weakest point, and they like to, have a laugh and joke. But sometimes, it goes too far. And I think that was one of those times. But I think it then crossed over into something really, really nasty, and with the chanting about with the hissing that is heard a lot. But I think it was so loud and noticeable that time last season that journalists there were able to pick up on it, and the cameras picked up on it, and then you see the photos of the guy doing the Nazi salute.
With incidents like this still happening, it begs the question, rather than deflect anti-Semitic abuse, does Tottenham's continued self-identity as Yids actually provoke the type of incident we saw last season? I asked Daniel Wynne, who is a senior member of the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust, that very question.
I'm not necessarily convinced the Lazio thing was based on Tottenham's Jewish identity, because I think a number of clubs that go to Rome suffer some sort of violence and some sort of attacks and abuse from the ultras in Rome. I think the West Ham thing happens year in, year out. It happens at Chelsea, it happens at Upton Park, it happens at Manchester City of all places as well. Unfortunately, that's been happening year in, year out. I don't accept the fact about Lazio, but unfortunately with West Ham, yes it does. You get the hissing noises, which is meant to represent the gas chambers, and that just shows a complete lack of intelligence, and it shows just complete and utter ignorance from a lower class set of people.
While Ivor Bidil accepts that Tottenham supporters used the word without any malicious intent, he remains convinced that the attack in Rome is a direct result of them identifying themselves as Yids.
I don't think Tottenham fans are being anti-Semitic. I don't think they're being malicious. I don't think their intent is to be malicious. With them, there's a number of issues. There's a confusion. When Tottenham fans chant the Y word, it's not because they're proud to be Jewish, it's because they're proud to be Tottenham fans. What they're doing is using a racist word for Jews to say I'm proud to be a Tottenham fan. And that confusion, to be honest, ultimately can have terrifying results, because last season we saw some of their fans, who I'm pretty sure are not Jewish, being attacked by anti-Semitic neo-Nazis in, I think, Lazio.
But surely, just because Tottenham fans refer to themselves as Yids, that doesn't give rival supporters an excuse or an invitation to hurl anti-Semitic abuse at them, does it? Ivan Cohen certainly doesn't think so.
I use the analogy that it's along the same lines of argument that women shouldn't wear short skirts because they're inviting rape. I think it's wrong. It's just plain wrong.
Right, I've taken my seat inside the ground now. The teams have just finished being read out over the loudspeaker. Teams are just lining up in their position. Kickoff's just moments away. I've got to try and be careful not to let the stewards see me, so I'm going to hide the recorder. And let's see if Tottenham fans chant the word Yid. The idea that Tottenham supporters have reclaimed the word Yid is an interesting one. and comparisons have been made with members of the black community reclaiming the N-word. Daniel Wynne likens it to the reclaiming of offensive words by members of the gay community too.
You know, they use the word queer, they use the word puff. If you go into a gay bar or a gay club, not that I do regularly, but from what I understand, that's a common word. Yet, if someone was to use that outside of a gay bar or a club or what have you, the word puff, it can be taken as an insult. You know, the N-word, it's exactly the same. And I dare say in future years, Luton Town, Bradford City, their supporters, their football club is in a predominantly Asian area, and they may embrace the term Paki for argument's sake. And I use that term in inverted commas.
It's easy to understand where comparisons like this come from. But there is one fundamental difference when it comes to the Yid debate. The racist term for Jews is being reclaimed by a group of people, the majority of whom are not even Jewish. What right do non-Jewish people have reclaiming the word Yid? Ivor Badil thinks none.
Ultimately, if it was only Jewish Tottenham fans trying to do that, and how you would know that, I don't really know, but then you might say, okay, I can see that what they're trying to do. It's predominantly non-Jewish people taking on this word that is a racist word for Jews. It's not. That's what I mean. As I'm saying it, you can feel the confusion. So it's not, it's not your word to reclaim, and yet, in some senses, I can see why they'd argue that it is.
John Crace, who is a Tottenham supporter but isn't Jewish, says that he has stopped chanting the word Yid for that very reason.
I've had second thoughts of it. The thing is that I'm still very kind of iffy, because I can still see the kind of positive reclamation. But I have become persuaded by the idea that it's not necessarily our word to reclaim.
So it's almost full time here at White Hart Lane. Tottenham are leading Tromsø by 3-0. The crowd have been enjoying themselves, they've been in good voice. And as you heard earlier, there have been a number of chants containing the word Yid, and these have been going on throughout the entire match, almost from the first whistle right up until the last. In fact, I would say almost as a show of defiance towards the FA statement, I would say that the Yid chants have been louder and even more frequent than normal tonight. There's been chants of "We'll sing what we want." They've broken out on several occasions. Jermaine Defoe, who's scored twice tonight, has been hailed as a Yiddo for his performance. And I've seen there's a young girl sitting a couple of rows in front of me. She must be no more than about 6 years old. She's been joining in with these chants. This is one of the problems. The younger generation of Tottenham supporters, they don't know what the word means. They think Yid is just another word for a Tottenham fan. This hasn't just been a small minority of supporters either. It's thousands. The word Yid, it just seems so cemented with the supporters here that it's almost certainly going to take a lot more than sort of a bit of encouragement from the FA to stop them singing it. Aside from the argument about whether Tottenham supporters have the moral right to adopt or reclaim the word Yid, there are also legal considerations. About a year ago, human rights barrister and chair of the Society of Black Lawyers, Peter Herbert, threatened to report the club's supporters to the police, claiming their use of the word Yid was no more than casual racism. At the time, Tottenham Hotspur issued a statement backing the supporters' use of the word, insisting it was used without deliberate intent to cause offence. Daniel Wynne, who is a senior member of the club's supporters trust and is also Jewish, completely agrees with the club's stance.
As long as it's used by Spurs fans inside a football ground, I'm firmly of the opinion that Tottenham fans use it positively, and therefore, despite what some people like Peter Herbert would say, as a point of law, there's no case to answer. That's a fact. Tottenham Hotspur as a football club have taken QC advice on this, and it's all about context and intent. Tottenham fans, and only Tottenham fans, use it to get behind their team. It's used positively, therefore the context of that, there's no intent to cause offence. You can't argue with that.
In November 2012, it seemed that the police were in agreement with the position of the club, and Tottenham were advised that supporters using the word Yid without deliberate intent to cause offence would not be prosecuted. I spoke to Peter Herbert to seek clarification. I asked him if Tottenham fans were breaking the law and if they could be prosecuted for using the word yid in the way that they do.
They can, because it doesn't matter what the intention of the perpetrator is, it's the impact on the victim that's important. So if the recipient does or might find it offensive, abusive, insulting or threatening, then the offence is made out. And therefore the Public Order Act was not designed with a racist in mind or anti-Semite, it was designed with a victim in mind.
It now seems that the Metropolitan Police have changed their position on the use of the word by Tottenham supporters. Having said a year ago that there would be no prosecutions if there was no deliberate intent to cause offence, they released a statement prior to Tottenham's Premier League clash with West Ham at the beginning of October, stating that the use of the word yid in any context may result in an arrest. After supporters ignored the FA warning, Peter Herbert thinks a number of high-profile prosecutions is the only way to put a stop to Tottenham fans using the word.
There may well have to be a prosecution by the Met, and they may have to send undercover officers in and target some of the ringleaders. I mean, it's just ridiculous to have a very vast majority of whom are Gentiles singing offensive terms about a group of people who really don't care. They certainly don't know about their history, and it's not necessary in any shape or form to enjoy a football match.
Despite the police warning before the game against West Ham, Tottenham fans chanted the word yid as usual, and one Spurs supporter was arrested for committing a Section 5 public order offence. The man has since been released on bail. When hundreds, if not thousands of supporters are joining in with the chants, it makes it hard for arrests to be made. The police can't exactly arrest 1,000 people on a Saturday afternoon. There does at least seem to be a desire from the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust to have a dialogue with fans to determine if now is the right time to move away from the word yid. The Trust has sent a consultation questionnaire to each supporter that has a club membership, asking for their views on the use of the word. But Peter Herbert says supporters shouldn't be asked their opinions because using the word yid is against the law.
I mean, you don't ask people whether domestic violence is okay. It's unlawful, end of story. So therefore, whilst it's a step in, some would say, the right direction, the law is the law, and I don't care whether it's at Tottenham or it's outside or inside a football ground, it's unlawful. And therefore you do not ask the general public to comment on a law which Parliament has passed. It's meant there to be there for everybody's protection. Get on and observe the law.
Perhaps it would be better for everyone if the decision to stop chanting the word yid came from the club and the supporters themselves, rather than having it forced upon them. But one thing is certain: this debate is far from over.